All right, I don't know if you've ever struggled to find the right words to say to express what you're thinking or feeling, but if you've ever experienced that, you know it's incredibly frustrating. My wife and I, Jamie, she is my amazing bride, and we have celebrated our 15-year anniversary this summer. Been married for 15 years. That's crazy. I don't feel old enough or wise enough or smart enough, but this summer she was cleaning out a closet upstairs and moving some boxes around, and behind a couple boxes she found this small little leather journal. She had no idea what it was, so she opened it up, and on the front page it said in my handwriting, 2011 things that I love about Jamie Ivey. All right, so she comes downstairs and she's like, oh my gosh, Aaron, what is this? This is incredible. This is like the best gift ever. She starts opening it and soon realizes why it took 5 years for her to find that thing. I never gave it to her in the year 2011. It was supposed to be a birthday gift for her, but she starts reading the first couple of pages and she realizes why I abandoned the idea completely. You know, the first couple of things that I loved about Jamie, the first pages included things like your smile, your charisma, your ability to captivate a room, your love for the Lord, right? Really awesome things, but flip over to 2021, number 409 got to things like your big toe, your pinky toe, the toe next to your pinky toe. I just ran out of things. I thought this was such a great idea, but I found myself 20 pages in, I could not think of 2011 things that I love about Jamie. I felt like a terrible husband, so I closed the book, put it behind some boxes, and 5 years later, she found it. Finding the right words to express what you feel or think about something is just really, really hard. Words sometimes feel so limiting. I hate injustice, but I also hate mosquitoes. So to say, use the word hate, right? When I'm thinking about murder and violence seems too tiny. And to say I hate mosquitoes seems like this massive overstatement, right? Finding the right words, it feels like you're trying to catch the wind with your hands. Even if you try it, it just slips through your fingers. If you think about it, it's actually amazing that we as humans are able to translate any of our thoughts into any words. So scientifically, it goes like this, all right? When we desire to speak something, it starts with a thought in our mind. And these thoughts are invisible. Nobody can see them or hear them, right? Thank goodness. But these thoughts, these invisible thoughts, they absolutely exist. And if our thoughts are ever to become visible, they have to move from the invisible highways of our imagination to the visible highways of spoken words. And so with God's brilliant design, our brain communicates those thoughts to our mouth where it forms sounds, and it becomes our logos, as the Greek language would put it. It becomes our logos, our spoken words. Our invisible thoughts become visible. Amazing, right? It would be amazing if it always worked out perfectly that way, but because we're human, we can't always find the right logos that we are desperate to find. I mean, what in the world do we really say about human trafficking? What do we say about poverty and wealth? What do we say about sexuality and politics and the refugee crisis? As Christians, it's a real struggle for us to find the right logos to speak, especially in light of all the complexities in this human life. But hear this, God does not struggle to find the right words. God has never struggled to find the right words, and God will never struggle to find the right words. He doesn't get frustrated because he can't figure out what to say. He's never been tongue-tied or at a loss for words. You know, he has a brilliant mind with fascinating thoughts, and he is the most well-spoken, eloquent speaker that has or ever will exist. Think about creation. When God created the world, he spoke it into existence. So God's invisible imaginations for the world became visible as he spoke, let there be light and let there be mountains. They came into existence with just a word. But God didn't stop there. He spoke to Adam and Eve. He spoke to the prophets. He spoke to kings and priests. God has always been a speaking God. And still, God didn't stop with that. In the book of John, you see one of the clearest statements of God's desire to speak to our world. The first couple of sentences in John chapter 1 are mind-blowing. It says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. John, who's describing Jesus here, right, was inspired to use such an interesting word here. In the Greek, he profoundly used the word logos to describe Jesus. So Jesus is God's spoken word to the world. And just like your logos is the physical manifestation of your thoughts and imaginations, so is Jesus the physical manifestation of God's thoughts and imaginations to his creation. So the question for us today is, why does that matter? Like, why does it matter that Jesus is called the Word? And check this out. This should absolutely stun us. This is what John goes on to say in verses 14 and 16. It says, "And the Word," the Logos, "became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory. Glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth, and from his fullness we have all received grace upon grace." Track with me here. God the Father is invisible. He has no human form. And God the Spirit is invisible. We can only feel him and catch glimpses of his stirring, but he has no human form. But God the Son, Logos, he became visible. So visible, in fact, that he had human flesh and he dwelt among us. The imaginations and thoughts of God are no longer invisible to us, but they're clearly seen in Jesus. Paul makes this point in Colossians chapter 1 when he says, the Son, Jesus, right? The Son is the image of the invisible God. So one of the reasons this matters to us, that Jesus is the Word, is because it clearly demonstrates God's immeasurable grace in making himself visible to us. Like the scriptures say, that's not just grace, but that's grace upon grace. You know, grace is getting something that you don't deserve. And the scriptures say you've been given grace upon grace. Listen, if there's any point in your life where you feel unloved by God, or you feel distant from God, you feel unmoved by God, you've got to remember that Jesus is God's spoken word to you. And a God who is not for you doesn't make himself visible to you. A God who loves you makes himself fully visible to you. He is the image of the invisible God. All right, so a second reason this matters to us, that Jesus is the Word, is because Jesus is God's final and decisive message to the world. Jesus is God's final and decisive message to the world. See, so for many centuries, like humanity waited around for a word from God. The prophets of old longed for a Messiah to come. They longed for a messenger to come. Hebrews chapter 1 says, long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by what? The prophets. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son. God has given us his final and decisive message. Listen, we don't need another prophet. We don't need another truth. We're not waiting around for another Moses figure. We have Jesus. And so what that means for us is the world needs a better word from us than our own word. Like, that's what the world needs. They need a better word from us than just our own words. Christians, you're called a lot of things in the scriptures. You're called sons. You're called daughters. You're called ambassadors. You're called salt. You're called light. You're called God's workmanship. But you have never been called the Word. Because there's only one person that deserves the title, the Word of God, and his name is Jesus. So in a culture where everyone's saying something but very few are saying anything that matters, we as the church, we have a word to speak. We have a message. We have an anthem. We have a protest. We have a declaration. We have a word. And our melodies may rile people up. Our rhythms and rhymes may inspire. But if our message only contains our words, our thoughts, our perspective, it will always fall flat. It can never be the hope that our world desperately needs. 2 Corinthians says, what we proclaim, this is the best news for us, what we proclaim is not ourselves, because the world needs a better word than our own. I'm so glad that God has never struggled to find the right words to say to us. He perfectly and precisely sent his Logos. The spoken word of God came to us in flesh. The spoken word of God is the final and decisive message to the world. There's no one like our God. And that's why it matters that Jesus is the Word.